Sarah Martinez had been living on the streets for 3 months when the autumn rains began. At 16 years old, she carried everything she owned in a torn backpack that barely stayed closed. Her parents had died in a car accident the previous winter, and the foster system had failed her repeatedly. After running away from her 4th placement, she decided the streets were safer than another abusive home. The small town of Cedar Falls sat at the edge of the Blackfoot Reservation, where old prejudices ran deep between the townspeople and the native community. Sarah had heard the whispers and seen the looks when tribal members came to town for supplies. She tried to stay invisible, sleeping in abandoned buildings and scavenging for food behind restaurants. On this particular evening, the rain fell harder than usual. Sarah huddled under the bridge that crossed Willow Creek, watching the water rise steadily. Her stomach cramped with hunger, and her thin jacket provided little protection against the cold October wind. She had found half a sandwich earlier, but it was long gone. As darkness settled over the town, Sarah noticed something unusual downstream. An old pickup truck had somehow ended up in the creek, its headlights still glowing under the murky water. The vehicle must have slid off the muddy road during the storm. She could barely make out the shape of someone trapped inside. Without thinking twice, Sarah dropped her backpack and waded into the freezing water. The current was stronger than she expected, and she had to fight to keep her footing on the slippery rocks. The water reached her waist by the time she got to the truck. Inside, she could see an elderly Native American man slumped over the steering wheel. Blood trickled down his forehead and he appeared unconscious. The driver's side door was jammed, but Sarah managed to force open the passenger door after several attempts. Water rushed into the cab as she climbed inside. The man was heavier than he looked, but Sarah had grown strong from months of surviving on her own. She grabbed him under his arms and pulled with all her might. His breathing was shallow and his skin felt dangerously cold. Every second counted as the water level continued to rise. Getting him out of the truck was only the first challenge. Sarah had to drag the unconscious man through the rushing water to the muddy bank. Her muscles screamed with exhaustion, but she refused to give up. By the time she pulled him to safety, both of them were soaked and shivering. The elderly man's eyes fluttered open briefly. He looked at Sarah with confusion and gratitude before losing consciousness again. She noticed the intricate turquoise jewelry around his neck and the traditional beadwork on his jacket. This was clearly someone important in the tribal community. Sarah knew she had to get help quickly. The nearest hospital was 20 miles away, but there was a small clinic in town that might still be open. She ran through the rain, her wet shoes squelching with each step until she found a payphone that worked. The paramedics arrived within 15 minutes, their ambulance lights cutting through the darkness. They found the old man exactly where Sarah had left him, covered with her own jacket to keep him warm. She had stayed with him the entire time, talking softly to keep him conscious whenever his eyes opened. As the medical team worked on the patient, Sarah tried to slip away unnoticed. She had learned to avoid authorities of any kind, knowing they would just try to put her back into the system. But one of the paramedics noticed her soaked condition and the way she kept shivering. The paramedic, a kind woman named Janet, insisted on checking Sarah for hypothermia. During the brief examination, Janet learned that Sarah was homeless and had been the one to rescue the elderly man. She wrapped Sarah in warm blankets and offered her hot coffee from the ambulance. At the hospital, doctors worked to stabilize their patient. The elderly man had suffered a concussion and mild hypothermia, but he was expected to make a full recovery. Without Sarah's quick actions, he would have certainly drowned in the rising creek water. Word spread quickly through both the town and the reservation about what had happened. The rescued man was Thomas Crow Feather, a respected elder and medicine man of the Blackfoot tribe. He was known throughout the region for his wisdom and his efforts to preserve traditional ways of life. Sarah learned Thomas's identity from overheard conversations at the hospital. She had never heard of him before, but everyone seemed to know who he was. Nurses spoke in hushed, respectful tones about the medicine man, and even the doctors treated him with unusual reverence. The next morning, Thomas was awake and alert. He asked to speak with the young woman who had saved his life, but Sarah had already disappeared. She had slipped out of the hospital before dawn, uncomfortable with all the attention her heroic act had generated. Thomas spent the day asking everyone about the mysterious girl. He learned her name was Sarah, that she was an orphan living on the streets, and that she had risked her own life without hesitation to save a complete stranger. The hospital staff described her as quiet but determined, someone who had clearly faced hardship but maintained her humanity. Meanwhile, Sarah returned to her life under the bridge. She tried to put the dramatic rescue behind her and focus on basic survival. Finding food and staying warm were her immediate priorities. She had no idea that her single act of courage would soon change everything. The local newspaper picked up the story, running a front-page article about the homeless teenager who saved the tribal elder. The reporter had interviewed several witnesses and painted Sarah as a local hero. The story spread to neighboring towns and eventually reached social media, where it began gaining wider attention. Thomas Crow Feather read the newspaper article from his hospital bed. He studied the grainy photograph of Sarah that someone had taken at the scene. There was something about her eyes that reminded him of his own granddaughter, who had passed away years earlier from cancer. As evening approached, Thomas made a decision that would honor both his personal gratitude and his responsibilities as a tribal elder. He called for his nephew Marcus, who served on the tribal council, and asked him to arrange an emergency meeting. What Thomas had in mind would require the approval and support of the entire community. Sarah, unaware of the attention her story was receiving, settled down for another cold night under the bridge. She pulled her damp jacket tighter and tried to ignore the growling in her stomach. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but at least she had the satisfaction of knowing she had saved a life. The rescue had awakened something inside her that had been dormant since her parents' death. For the first time in months, Sarah felt like she mattered, like her actions could make a difference in the world. She had no way of knowing that the Blackfoot tribe was already making plans that would prove just how much her courage meant to them. The morning after the rescue, Sarah woke to the sound of voices nearby. She had learned to be a light sleeper during her months on the street, always alert to potential danger. Peering out from under the bridge, she saw 3 people in traditional, Native American clothing walking along the creek bank. 2 men and an older woman moved slowly through the area where the accident had happened. They seemed to be looking for something, occasionally stopping to examine the muddy ground or point at specific spots. Sarah recognized this as the place where she had pulled Thomas from the truck. The older woman carried a bundle of burning sage, and sweet smoke drifted on the morning breeze. Sarah watched as they performed what appeared to be some kind of ceremony, speaking in a language she did not understand. Their voices carried respect and gratitude as they honored the spot where a life had been saved. Marcus Crow Feather, Thomas's nephew, led the small group. As a tribal council member, he felt responsible for properly acknowledging what had happened. The woman with the sage was Elena Running Bear, a tribal elder who specialized in blessing ceremonies. The third person was James White Elk, the tribe's social worker. After completing their ceremony, the 3 began searching the area more systematically. They were looking for Sarah, hoping to find her before she moved to a different location. Thomas had given them a detailed description based on what witnesses had told him about the young woman who saved his life. Sarah remained hidden, uncertain about their intentions. Her experience with adults in authority had taught her to be cautious. Even though these people seemed peaceful, she had learned that appearances could be deceiving. She decided to wait and observe before making any decisions. Marcus called out in English, his voice gentle and non-threatening. He explained that they were looking for the brave young woman who had rescued Thomas Crow Feather. He promised they only wanted to thank her properly and offer their assistance. His words echoed under the bridge, but Sarah remained silent. Elena stepped forward and spoke in both English and Blackfoot, explaining that they came with gratitude and respect. She mentioned that Thomas was recovering well and had asked them to find Sarah. The elder's voice carried warmth and sincerity that touched something deep in Sarah's heart. Eventually, hunger and curiosity overcame Sarah's caution. She emerged, slowly from her hiding place, ready to run if necessary. The 3 visitors showed no surprise at her appearance, though Elena's eyes reflected sadness when she saw Sarah's thin frame and worn clothing. Marcus introduced himself and the others, explaining their connection to Thomas. He told Sarah that the entire tribe had heard about her courageous rescue and wanted to express their gratitude properly. Sarah listened carefully, still maintaining a safe distance in case she needed to escape quickly. James White Elk stepped forward with a warm smile. As the tribal social worker, he was accustomed to dealing with young people in difficult situations. He explained that they understood Sarah was living independently and respected her right to make her own choices. They were not there to force her into any system or situation against her will. This assurance helped Sarah relax slightly. Too many adults had made decisions for her without considering her feelings or preferences. The fact that these strangers acknowledged her autonomy meant more to her than they could know. She agreed to listen to what they had to say. Elena opened a cloth bundle and offered Sarah fresh bread, dried meat, and herbal tea. The food smelled wonderful, and Sarah's stomach responded with a loud growl that made everyone smile. She accepted the meal gratefully and ate slowly, savoring flavors she had not experienced in months. While Sarah ate, Marcus explained that Thomas wanted to meet with her personally when she felt ready. The medicine man was still in the hospital but would be discharged soon. He had specifically requested that they find Sarah and invite her to visit the reservation as the tribe's honored guest. Sarah had never been to the reservation before. Like many townspeople, she had heard stories and rumors but had never actually spoken with tribal members until now. The kindness and respect these three showed her challenged many assumptions she had unconsciously accepted about Native Americans. James explained that the tribe wanted to offer Sarah a place to stay while she figured out her next steps in life. They had a guest house where she could have her own space and privacy. There would be no strings attached and no pressure to do anything she did not want to do. The offer was simply their way of honoring her heroic actions. The proposal seemed too good to be true. Sarah had learned to be suspicious of offers that promised too much with too few conditions. She asked direct questions about what would be expected of her and what rules she would need to follow. Her straightforward approach impressed all three visitors. Marcus answered honestly that they hoped she would allow them to help her get back on her feet. This might include assistance with education, job training, or whatever path she chose to pursue. However, he emphasized that accepting their hospitality created no obligations beyond basic respect for their community. Elena added that many tribal members had been moved by Sarah's story. In Blackfoot culture, courage and selflessness were highly valued qualities. By risking her own safety to save Thomas, Sarah had demonstrated the kind of character they admired most. She had acted not for reward or recognition, but simply because it was the right thing to do. The conversation continued for over an hour. Sarah found herself opening up about her experiences since her parents' death and her struggles with the foster care system. She explained why she had chosen life on the streets over another potentially harmful placement with strangers. James listened with professional understanding and personal compassion. He explained that the tribal social services operated differently from the state system. They focused on community support and cultural healing rather than institutional solutions. Their approach emphasized restoring relationships and building strength from within traditional values. As the morning progressed, Sarah felt a growing sense of possibility. These people spoke to her with genuine respect and seemed to understand her situation without judgment. For the first time in months, she began to hope that her circumstances might actually improve. Marcus mentioned that the tribal council would be meeting that evening to formally discuss ways to honor Sarah's heroic actions. While they already planned to offer her shelter and support, Thomas had suggested something much more significant. He wanted the council to consider adopting Sarah into the tribe as a way of acknowledging her courage and character. This news shocked Sarah completely. She had never imagined that her impulsive rescue of a stranger could lead to such life-changing possibilities. The idea of belonging to a community again, of having people who cared about her welfare, seemed almost impossible to believe. Elena noticed Sarah's emotional reaction and spoke gently about what tribal adoption would mean. It was not just a symbolic gesture, but a genuine commitment to treat Sarah as family. She would have access to tribal resources, educational opportunities, and most importantly, a permanent place where she belonged. As the three visitors prepared to leave, they gave Sarah time to consider their offer. They provided her with a cell phone so she could contact them with questions or when she made her decision. They also left additional food and a warmer jacket to help her through another night if she chose to remain under the bridge. Sarah watched them walk away, her mind spinning with possibilities she had never dared to imagine. The simple act of pulling a drowning man from a creek had opened doors she never knew existed. For the first time since her parents' death, she began to believe that her future might hold hope instead of just survival. That evening, Sarah made her decision. She used the cell phone Marcus had given her and called to accept the tribe's invitation. Within an hour, James White Elk arrived with a warm truck to take her to the reservation. As they drove through the familiar streets of Cedar Falls, Sarah felt like she was leaving one life behind and moving toward something completely unknown. The Blackfoot Reservation stretched for miles beyond the town limits. Sarah had driven past the entrance many times but had never actually entered tribal lands. Rolling hills dotted with traditional homes and modern buildings created a landscape that seemed both ancient and contemporary. Solar panels sat alongside traditional sweat lodges, and pickup trucks shared driveways with horses. James pointed out important locations as they drove: the tribal offices, the community center, the health clinic, and the school. He explained that about 3,000 people lived on the reservation, making it a sizable community with its own government, services, and traditions. Sarah listened carefully, trying to understand the world she might soon call home. The guest house where Sarah would stay was a modest but comfortable building near the community center. It had been built specifically to house visitors and people in transition. James showed her around the two-bedroom space, which included a fully equipped kitchen, living room, and bathroom. After months of sleeping rough, having hot running water, and electric lighting felt like incredible luxury. Sarah's room contained a comfortable bed, a desk, dresser, and large windows that looked out over the prairie. Clean clothes in her approximate size hung in the closet, along with traditional items like a beaded headband and a soft leather jacket. Someone had clearly put thought and care into preparing for her arrival. As Sarah settled into her temporary home, word spread throughout the reservation about her presence. Many tribal members had read the newspaper story about the rescue, and everyone was curious about the courageous young woman who had saved Thomas Crow Feather. Children asked their parents when they could meet the hero, while elders nodded approvingly when discussing her actions. The next morning brought Sarah's first official introduction to reservation life. Elena Running Bear arrived early with traditional clothing and an invitation to attend the morning gathering. Many tribal members started each day with community prayers and discussions about daily activities. Sarah was welcome to participate, or simply observe whatever made her comfortable. Walking into the community center felt intimidating at first. About 50 people of all ages had gathered in a large circle, and conversations stopped as Sarah entered. She worried that she was intruding on something private and sacred, but Elena guided her gently to a seat near other young people. An elderly man Sarah did not recognize began speaking in Blackfoot, his voice carrying across the room with authority and warmth. Elena whispered translations, explaining that he was offering prayers for the day and asking for blessings on all community members, including their honored guest. Sarah realized he was talking about her. After the formal prayers, several people approached Sarah with genuine smiles and words of welcome. They spoke simply and directly, thanking her for saving Thomas and expressing happiness that she had come to stay with them. Their acceptance felt natural and unforced, unlike the awkward interactions she often experienced with well-meaning social workers. Marcus Crow Feather announced that Thomas would be released from the hospital later that day. The medicine man was eager to meet Sarah personally and express his gratitude. A small ceremony was planned for that evening, where Thomas would formally thank his rescuer before the entire community. Sarah spent the day learning about daily life on the reservation. She visited the school where tribal children learned both standard curriculum and traditional subjects like native languages and cultural history. The teachers explained how they balanced preparing students for the modern world while preserving important ancestral knowledge. The health clinic impressed Sarah with its combination of modern medical equipment and traditional healing practices. Doctors worked alongside tribal healers, offering patients choice in their treatment approaches. James explained that this integration of old and new ways characterized much of life on the reservation. At the tribal offices, Sarah met council, members who would vote on Thomas's proposal to adopt her into the tribe. Each person she encountered was professional but warm, treating her like a valued guest rather than a charity case. Their respect for her autonomy and dignity stood in sharp contrast to her experiences with government social services. As evening approached, community members began gathering for Thomas's homecoming ceremony. The event would take place in the traditional council lodge, a circular building designed for important community gatherings. Sarah felt nervous about being the center of attention, but also honored to participate in something so meaningful. Thomas Crowfeather arrived looking much better than when Sarah had pulled him from the creek. Though still moving carefully due to his injuries, his eyes were bright and his smile was genuine. He wore traditional ceremonial clothing, including an elaborate feathered headdress that marked his status as a medicine man and elder. The ceremony began with drumming and songs in the Blackfoot language. Sarah watched in fascination as community members performed dances that had been passed down through generations. The rhythm and movement created a hypnotic atmosphere that seemed to connect everyone present to something larger than themselves. When Thomas stood to speak, the entire gathering fell silent. His voice carried easily through the lodge as he recounted the night of the accident from his perspective. He described regaining consciousness in the flooded truck, certain that he was about to die, then seeing Sarah's face appear at the passenger window like an answer to prayer. Thomas explained to the community that Sarah's actions represented the highest values of courage and compassion. She had risked her own life for a complete stranger, asking nothing in return. In Blackfoot tradition, such selfless bravery created sacred bonds between individuals and communities that could never be broken. The medicine man then turned to Sarah, directly. Speaking in English so she could understand every word, he thanked her for giving him the opportunity to continue serving his people. Without her intervention, his knowledge and experience would have been lost forever. Her courage had preserved not just one life, but all the wisdom and guidance he could still provide to future generations. Thomas presented Sarah with a beautiful necklace made from turquoise, silver, and sacred stones. He explained that it had belonged to his grandmother, a powerful medicine woman who had helped guide the tribe through difficult times in the early 20th century. By giving Sarah this precious heirloom, he was honoring her place in the tribe's ongoing story. The ceremony continued with speeches from other community leaders, each acknowledging Sarah's heroism and welcoming her into their extended family. Children came forward with handmade gifts, drawings, beaded bracelets, and small carved animals. Their innocent enthusiasm and acceptance moved Sarah to tears. As the formal portion of the ceremony concluded, the gathering transformed into a celebration. People shared food, told stories, and continued the music and dancing late into the night. Sarah found herself swept up in the joy and community spirit, feeling more accepted and valued than she had since her parents' death. Marcus pulled Sarah aside near the end of the evening to discuss the adoption process. The tribal council would meet in 3 days to vote on Thomas's proposal. While the outcome seemed positive based on community response, the formal decision required careful consideration and unanimous approval from all council members. Sarah returned to her guest house that night with her head spinning from all she had experienced. The turquoise necklace felt warm against her skin, a tangible symbol of belonging she had never expected to receive. For the first time in over a year, she fell asleep feeling safe, valued, and hopeful about tomorrow. Outside, her window, the prairie stretched endlessly under a canopy of stars. Somewhere in that darkness, she knew, was the creek where she had pulled Thomas Crowfeather from certain death. That single moment of courage had led her to this place of acceptance and possibility, proving that even the smallest acts of kindness could change everything. The 3 days before the tribal council meeting passed quickly, as Sarah immersed herself in reservation life. Each morning brought new experiences and deeper connections with community members who seemed genuinely interested in her welfare and happiness. She began to understand that her rescue of Thomas had resonated far beyond simple gratitude. Elena Running Bear became Sarah's unofficial guide and mentor during this period. The elder woman possessed vast knowledge about tribal traditions and seemed to understand exactly what Sarah needed to learn. Elena explained that the Blackfoot people valued actions over words, and Sarah's courage during the rescue demonstrated character that could not be taught or faked. During their walks across the prairie, Elena shared stories about the tribe's history and values. She explained how the Blackfoot had survived centuries of challenges by maintaining strong community bonds and helping those in need. Sarah's instinctive willingness to risk her own safety for a stranger aligned perfectly with these ancient principles. The elder also taught Sarah about the significance of adoption in Blackfoot culture. Unlike legal adoption in mainstream society, tribal adoption created spiritual and cultural bonds that extended far beyond individual relationships. If the council approved Thomas's proposal, Sarah would become not just his adopted daughter, but a full member of the entire tribal community with all the rights and responsibilities that entailed. Meanwhile, Thomas Crow Feather spent his recovery time consulting with other tribal elders about his proposal. While his gratitude toward Sarah was obvious, formal adoption required consideration of how this decision would affect the entire community. Some elders questioned whether someone with no native ancestry could truly understand and honor Blackfoot traditions. These concerns were not based on prejudice against Sarah personally, but on genuine worry about preserving tribal identity and culture. The Blackfoot had fought for generations to maintain their traditions against outside pressure to assimilate. Welcoming someone from the dominant culture into full tribal membership represented a significant departure from historical practice. However, Thomas argued persuasively that character and actions mattered more than ancestry. He reminded the other elders that many tribal members had mixed heritage from generations of intermarriage with other groups. What made someone truly Blackfoot was not the purity of their bloodline, but their commitment to living according to tribal values. Sarah remained unaware of these discussions as she continued learning about her potential new community. She visited the tribal museum, where artifacts and exhibits told the story of Blackfoot civilization from ancient times to the present. The displays helped her understand the depth and richness of the culture she might soon join. At the tribal school, Sarah met teenagers who faced challenges similar to her own experiences. Many came from broken families or had struggled with identity issues while navigating between reservation life and mainstream American society. Their acceptance of her felt natural and unforced, based on shared experiences rather than pity for her circumstances. The reservation's youth counselor, a woman named Dr. Maria Spotted Eagle, spent significant time with Sarah discussing her educational goals and future plans. Unlike previous counselors who had focused primarily on managing Sarah's problems, Dr. Spotted Eagle emphasized discovering and developing her strengths and interests. Sarah revealed that she had always enjoyed reading and writing, but had fallen behind academically during her time on the streets. Dr. Spotted Eagle arranged for tutoring sessions and suggested that Sarah might eventually pursue college if she chose to stay with the tribe. The possibility of higher education had seemed impossible during her months of homelessness. As the council meeting approached, Sarah noticed increased activity and discussion throughout the community. While most tribal members supported her adoption, she overheard conversations suggesting that some people had concerns about the precedent this decision might establish. She worried that her presence might create division within the community. James White Elk reassured Sarah that healthy debate was normal before important decisions. The tribal council took their responsibilities seriously and always considered multiple perspectives before voting. The fact that they were having extensive discussions actually demonstrated how seriously they were considering Thomas's proposal. On the evening before the council meeting, Thomas invited Sarah to join him for a private conversation at his home. The medicine man's house reflected his status and interests, with traditional artwork displayed alongside modern amenities. Shelves lined with books about tribal history and spirituality surrounded a comfortable living area where they sat to talk. Thomas began by explaining his perspective on the adoption proposal. He told Sarah that saving his life had created a bond between them that transcended ordinary relationships. In Blackfoot belief, when someone preserved another person's life, they became responsible for that person's spiritual well-being. By the same token, the rescued person owed the rescuer a lifetime debt that could never be fully repaid. However, Thomas emphasized that his proposal was about much more than personal obligation. During his years as a medicine man, he had learned to recognize people with special spiritual qualities. Sarah possessed courage, compassion, and integrity that could not be taught or acquired through practice. These were gifts that marked her as someone capable of serving the community in meaningful ways. The elder explained that many tribal prophecies spoke of a time when the Blackfoot would need allies from other backgrounds to help preserve their culture and traditions. Perhaps Sarah's arrival in their lives represented fulfillment of these ancient predictions. Her outsider perspective might actually strengthen the tribe by bringing fresh insights to old challenges. Thomas also addressed practical concerns about Sarah's ability to learn and honor Blackfoot traditions. He offered to serve as her mentor, teaching her the languages, customs, and spiritual practices that defined tribal identity. This education would take years to complete, but Thomas believed Sarah had demonstrated the character necessary to succeed. Sarah listened carefully to everything Thomas said, feeling both honored and overwhelmed by his confidence in her potential. She expressed her own concerns about whether she could live up to the expectations that formal adoption would create. The responsibility of representing tribal values to the outside world seemed daunting for someone who had barely survived on her own. Thomas smiled at her honesty and humility, explaining that these very qualities proved her readiness for the challenges ahead. Someone who understood the weight of responsibility was far more likely to handle it appropriately than someone who approached it carelessly. Her awareness of the commitment involved demonstrated wisdom beyond her years. As their conversation continued, Thomas shared more personal details about his own life and experiences. He spoke about losing his wife and daughter in separate accidents years earlier, and how those losses had deepened his appreciation for the preciousness of every life. Sarah's courage in saving him had reminded him that unexpected heroes could appear when they were most needed. The medicine man also revealed that he had no other family members who could continue his work after his death. While he could train other tribal members in some aspects of traditional healing and spiritual guidance, he had hoped to find someone who could carry forward his specific knowledge and approaches. Perhaps Sarah could eventually fill that role, bridging traditional wisdom with contemporary understanding. This possibility both excited and intimidated Sarah. The idea of learning ancient healing practices and spiritual traditions appealed to her deeply, but she worried about her ability to master such complex and sacred knowledge. Thomas assured her that capability would develop over time if she approached the learning with proper respect and dedication. As the evening ended, Thomas gave Sarah a small pouch containing herbs and stones used in traditional ceremonies. He explained that these items would help her connect with tribal spiritual practices and serve as reminders of the sacred responsibilities that came with tribal membership. Whether or not the council approved his adoption proposal, he wanted her to understand that she would always have a place in his personal family. Sarah returned to her guest house that night with mixed emotions. The depth of Thomas's faith in her potential was both inspiring and overwhelming. Tomorrow's council meeting would determine not just her immediate future, but the entire direction of her life. For someone who had been making day-to-day survival decisions just weeks earlier, the magnitude of these possibilities felt almost impossible to process. Sleep came slowly as Sarah thought about everything she had learned during her time on the reservation. The Blackfoot community had shown her kindness and acceptance unlike anything she had experienced since her parents' death. Whether or not she officially became a tribal member, these people had already given her something invaluable: hope for a meaningful future and belief in her own worth as a human being. The morning of the tribal council meeting dawned clear and cold across the reservation. Sarah woke before sunrise, too nervous to sleep any longer. Today would determine whether she would officially become a member of the Blackfoot tribe or need to find another path forward. Either outcome would change her life forever. Elena Running Bear arrived early with traditional clothing for Sarah to wear to the council meeting. The outfit consisted of a beautiful buckskin dress decorated with intricate beadwork, matching moccasins, and a beaded hair ornament. Elena explained that wearing traditional clothing would show respect for the council and demonstrate Sarah's serious commitment to tribal culture. As Elena helped Sarah dress, she shared advice about council protocol and expectations. The 12 council members would ask Sarah questions about her understanding of tribal responsibilities and her commitment to living according to Blackfoot values. She should answer honestly and directly, showing both respect for their authority and confidence in her own convictions. The council lodge filled slowly throughout the morning as community members arrived to witness the historic meeting. Word had spread beyond the reservation, and several regional newspaper reporters waited outside, hoping to cover the story of the homeless teenager who might become the first non-native person adopted into the Blackfoot tribe in over 50 years. Sarah took her designated seat near the front of the lodge, flanked by Thomas Crowfeather and Marcus as her sponsors. The formal arrangement felt intimidating, but the presence of supportive community members helped calm her nerves. Children smiled and waved from their seats, while elders nodded approvingly at her traditional clothing and respectful demeanor. Council. Chairwoman Dorothy Blackhorse called the meeting to order with prayers in both Blackfoot and English. She acknowledged the historic nature of the decision they were about to make and emphasized the importance of considering both individual circumstances and community welfare. The council's responsibility extended beyond Sarah's immediate situation to the long-term health of tribal culture and identity. Thomas spoke first, presenting his formal adoption proposal to the council. He recounted the night of his rescue in detail, emphasizing not just Sarah's physical courage but her immediate willingness to help a stranger without thought of personal reward. Such selfless action demonstrated character that aligned with the most fundamental Blackfoot values. The medicine man then addressed concerns about adopting someone without native ancestry. He argued that tribal identity had always been based on more than bloodline, citing historical examples of people from other backgrounds who had been welcomed into Blackfoot communities. What mattered most was an individual's commitment to living according to tribal principles and contributing to community welfare. Thomas concluded by explaining his personal bond with Sarah and his desire to ensure she had family support throughout her life. As an elder with no other descendants, he felt responsible for passing on his knowledge and ensuring continuity of his healing practices. Sarah possessed the intelligence and character necessary to carry forward this important work. Marcus Crowfeather spoke next, representing the perspective of younger tribal members. He emphasized that Sarah's heroic actions had inspired children and teenagers throughout the community, providing them with a powerful example of courage and selflessness. Her presence had already strengthened the community by reminding everyone of their highest values. Council member Janet Blackfoot raised concerns about establishing precedents that might complicate future adoption requests. While she personally supported Sarah's acceptance, she worried about managing similar situations involving people with less obvious qualifications or community support. The council needed to consider implications beyond this individual case. Elder Robert Heavy Runner spoke about the importance of preserving tribal culture and language for future generations. He questioned whether someone raised outside native traditions could truly understand and honor Blackfoot spiritual practices. His concerns reflected genuine worry about cultural dilution rather than personal opposition to Sarah. Dr. Maria Spotted Eagle addressed educational and social service perspectives, explaining how Sarah's adoption could benefit both her individual development and the tribe's youth programs. Her experiences with mainstream foster care and homelessness provided valuable insights that could help the tribe better serve at-risk children from their own community. Several community members were invited to share their observations about Sarah's character and behavior during her stay on the reservation. Teachers, healthcare workers, and families who had interacted with her spoke uniformly about her respectfulness, eagerness to learn, and genuine interest in contributing to community life. After 2 hours of discussion, Chairwoman Blackhorse invited Sarah to address the council directly. This moment represented her opportunity to explain why she wanted to join the tribe and demonstrate her understanding of the responsibilities involved. The lodge fell completely silent as she stood to speak. Sarah began by thanking the council for considering Thomas's proposal and the entire community for welcoming her with such kindness. She explained that her time on the reservation had taught her what it meant to belong to something larger than herself. The support and acceptance she had received contrasted sharply with her previous experiences in institutional settings. She acknowledged her limited knowledge of Blackfoot traditions, but expressed genuine eagerness to learn. Sarah explained that she understood adoption would create lifelong obligations to serve and protect the community, responsibilities she was prepared to accept with humility and dedication. Sarah spoke about her experiences on the streets and how they had taught her the value of community support and mutual aid. She had learned that survival required both individual strength and willingness to help others when possible. These lessons aligned with what she had observed about Blackfoot culture during her stay on the reservation. The teenager addressed concerns about her ability to preserve and honor tribal traditions. While she could never claim Native ancestry, she could commit to learning languages, ceremonies, and cultural practices with the respect they deserved. Her outsider perspective might actually help communicate tribal values to non-Native audiences who needed to understand and support Indigenous rights. Sarah concluded by explaining that joining the Blackfoot tribe would give her life meaning and direction that had been missing since her parents' death. In return, she promised to dedicate herself to serving the community's needs in whatever ways her abilities allowed. The rescue of Thomas had been instinctive, but her commitment to tribal welfare would be conscious and deliberate. Council member Elizabeth Tailfeathers asked Sarah about her long-term goals and how tribal membership would affect her future plans. Sarah replied honestly that she hoped to pursue education and eventually develop skills that could benefit the reservation. She was particularly interested in social work or healthcare, fields where she could help other young people facing similar challenges. Robert Heavy Runner questioned Sarah more deeply about her spiritual beliefs and willingness to participate in traditional ceremonies. She explained that while she had been raised Christian, her experiences had opened her to different spiritual perspectives. She was eager to learn about Blackfoot spiritual practices and participate respectfully in whatever ways were appropriate for someone still learning. The questioning continued for another hour, covering topics ranging from Sarah's understanding of tribal sovereignty to her willingness to defend tribal rights in political contexts. Her answers demonstrated both humility about what she still needed to learn and determination to fulfill whatever responsibilities tribal membership would require. After Sarah returned to her seat, the council recessed for private deliberation. Community members remained in the lodge, some praying quietly while others discussed the proceedings in hushed tones. The waiting felt endless as Sarah sat between Thomas and Marcus, trying to prepare herself for either outcome. When the council reconvened, Chairwoman Blackhorse announced that they had reached a unanimous decision. The formal vote would be recorded, but she wanted to address the community first about the reasoning behind their choice. The lodge fell completely silent as everyone waited for the verdict. Dorothy Blackhorse explained that the council had been deeply moved by Sarah's courage, character, and commitment to learning tribal ways. Her rescue of Thomas demonstrated values that aligned perfectly with Blackfoot traditions of helping others without regard for personal safety. Her respectful behavior during her stay on the reservation had convinced them of her sincerity. However, the chairwoman continued, the council recognized the unprecedented nature of this decision and wanted to establish clear expectations. Sarah's adoption would include a probationary period, during which she would work closely with Thomas and other mentors to learn tribal languages, customs, and responsibilities. Her full acceptance would depend on demonstrated progress and continued commitment. The council had also decided to create formal protocols for future adoption requests, ensuring that this decision would not create unrealistic expectations or unmanageable precedents. Each case would be evaluated individually based on specific circumstances and community benefit. Chairwoman Blackhorse then announced the council's unanimous vote to approve Thomas Crowfeather's adoption proposal. Sarah Martinez would officially become Sarah Crowfeather, a full member of the Blackfoot tribe with all the rights and responsibilities that status entailed. The decision would take effect immediately following a formal adoption ceremony. The announcement triggered immediate celebration throughout the lodge. Community members cheered and applauded while children rushed forward to congratulate Sarah. Thomas embraced his new daughter with tears in his eyes, while Marcus welcomed his new cousin with obvious joy. Elena Running Bear began singing a traditional song of welcome that others quickly joined. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened. In the space of a few weeks, she had gone from sleeping under a bridge to becoming an official member of a Native American tribe. The transformation seemed impossible, yet the warmth and acceptance surrounding her made it undeniably real. As the celebration continued, Sarah thought about the moment she had pulled Thomas from the creek. That single act of courage had led to this incredible opportunity for belonging and purpose. She had saved one life, and in doing so had discovered a new life for herself. The formal adoption ceremony was scheduled for the following weekend, giving the community time to prepare for a major celebration. Sarah would spend the intervening days learning about the ceremony's significance and her role in the proceedings. Thomas had already begun planning her education in tribal traditions, starting with basic language lessons and cultural history. Outside the lodge, news reporters waited eagerly for statements about the historic decision. Sarah's story had captured regional attention, and the tribe's decision to adopt her would likely generate national interest. However, Sarah felt ready to handle public attention with the support of her new family and community. As evening fell over the reservation, Sarah walked across the prairie with Thomas and Elena, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Tomorrow would begin her formal education as a Blackfoot tribal member, but tonight she simply wanted to appreciate the remarkable journey that had brought her to this moment. The homeless teenager who had rescued a drowning stranger was gone forever. In her place stood Sarah Crowfeather, daughter of a medicine man and member of a proud Native American tribe. Her new life would bring challenges and responsibilities she could barely imagine, but she would face them with the strength that had enabled her to pull Thomas from that flooding creek. 1 year after the formal adoption ceremony, Sarah Crowfeather stood before a packed auditorium at Montana State University, delivering the keynote address at a conference on Indigenous rights and social justice. The transformation from homeless teenager to tribal advocate had been remarkable, but the journey had required dedication and perseverance that tested every aspect of her character. The months following her adoption had brought intensive education in Blackfoot language, culture, and traditions. Thomas Crowfeather proved to be a patient but demanding teacher, expecting Sarah to master not just the surface elements of tribal life, but the deeper spiritual and philosophical principles that guided Blackfoot society. She spent hours each day studying language tapes and practicing pronunciation with native speakers. Elena Running Bear became Sarah's mentor in women's traditions, teaching her beadwork, traditional cooking, and the ceremonial roles that women played in tribal spiritual life. These lessons required not just technical skill, but understanding of the sacred meanings behind every pattern, ingredient, and gesture. Sarah approached this education with the same determination that had driven her survival on the streets. The probationary period established by the tribal council proved valuable for both Sarah and the community. Rather than feeling restrictive, the formal structure helped her understand exactly what was expected and provided clear milestones for measuring her progress. Other tribal members could observe her commitment without worrying about premature acceptance or cultural appropriation. Sarah's story had indeed attracted national attention, bringing media coverage that the tribe used strategically to highlight broader issues affecting Native communities. She became an articulate spokesperson for tribal sovereignty, educational opportunities, and the foster care system's failures. Her unique perspective as an adopted outsider gave her credibility with mainstream audiences, while her deep commitment to tribal values maintained respect within the Native community. The educational opportunities that Dr. Maria Spotted Eagle had mentioned became reality sooner than anyone expected. Several universities offered Sarah scholarships based on her compelling personal story and demonstrated academic ability. After extensive discussion with Thomas and the Tribal Council, she chose to pursue social work with a focus on Indigenous community development. Balancing college coursework with her ongoing cultural education required careful time management and unwavering dedication. Sarah spent weekdays attending classes and studying at the university, then returned to the reservation each weekend for language lessons, ceremony participation, and community service. This schedule was exhausting, but allowed her to develop expertise in both traditional and contemporary approaches to social issues. Her undergraduate thesis examined parallels between traditional Blackfoot community support systems and modern social work practices. The research required extensive interviews with tribal elders and careful analysis of historical documents. Sarah's findings suggested that incorporating indigenous wisdom into mainstream social services could improve outcomes for all clients, not just Native Americans. The thesis caught attention from academic publishers and policymakers interested in culturally responsive social work practices. Sarah found herself invited to speak at conferences and contribute to scholarly journals, while still completing her degree requirements. Her dual identity as both insider and outsider to Native culture provided unique insights that enriched academic discourse. Meanwhile, her relationship with Thomas deepened beyond the formal mentor-student dynamic. The medicine man had initially seen Sarah as someone who could potentially continue his healing work, but their bond evolved into genuine father-daughter affection. Thomas began including Sarah in his most sacred ceremonies, trusting her with knowledge typically reserved for those born into the tradition. Sarah's presence in Thomas's life also renewed his energy for teaching and community leadership. Having someone eager to learn traditional ways reminded him of the importance of preserving and transmitting cultural knowledge. He began documenting ceremonies and healing practices more systematically, ensuring that his expertise would survive even if Sarah eventually chose different paths. The tribal community's initial acceptance of Sarah grew into deep respect and affection as her commitment became undeniable. She participated in every community activity from school fundraisers to political protests, always approaching her involvement with appropriate humility and genuine enthusiasm. Children who had been curious about the adopted outsider now simply saw her as Sarah, Thomas's daughter and their community member. Her work with at-risk youth became particularly meaningful, as Sarah used her own experiences to connect with teenagers facing similar challenges. She developed programs that combined traditional Blackfoot mentorship approaches with contemporary therapeutic techniques. The success of these interventions attracted funding from federal agencies interested in culturally appropriate social services. Sarah's romantic life remained complicated by her unique position within the community. Dating tribal members raised questions about cultural authenticity and insider status, while relationships with non-natives often foundered on their inability to understand her deep commitment to reservation life. She focused on her education and community service, trusting that the right relationship would develop naturally when the time was appropriate. The media attention that had initially focused on Sarah's dramatic rescue story gradually shifted to recognize her emerging expertise in Indigenous social work and community development. She appeared on national television programs discussing Native American issues and testified before congressional committees examining foster care reform. Her articulate advocacy helped change public perceptions about both homeless youth and tribal communities. 5 years after joining the Blackfoot tribe, Sarah completed her master's degree in social work and returned to the reservation permanently to direct the newly created Indigenous Youth Services program. The position allowed her to apply everything she had learned about traditional healing practices and contemporary social work techniques to serve her adopted community. The program's success exceeded everyone's expectations, reducing youth suicide rates and improving high school graduation statistics significantly. Sarah's approach emphasized connection to cultural identity and traditional support systems while addressing practical issues like substance abuse and educational challenges. Her methods attracted attention from other tribes, seeking to develop similar programs. Thomas Crowfeather lived to see Sarah complete her graduate education and establish herself as a respected leader within the tribal community. His pride in her accomplishments was evident to everyone who knew them, and his confidence in her ability to carry forward traditional healing knowledge proved justified. When he passed away peacefully at age 85, Sarah was prepared to assume many of his responsibilities. The funeral ceremony for Thomas drew hundreds of people from throughout the region, including government officials, academic colleagues, and media representatives who had covered Sarah's story over the years. During the memorial service, speaker after speaker testified to how Thomas's adoption of Sarah had enriched not just their individual lives, but the entire community's spiritual and cultural vitality. Sarah's eulogy for her adopted father focused on his wisdom in recognizing that tribal identity was based on character and commitment, rather than ancestry alone. She credited him with teaching her that courage was not just about dramatic rescue moments, but about daily dedication to serving others and preserving important traditions for future generations. As the memorial concluded, Sarah reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her from sleeping under a bridge to leading funeral ceremonies for respected tribal elders. The path had been neither easy nor predictable, but every challenge had contributed to her growth as both an individual and a community member. Years later, when journalists asked Sarah about the moment that changed her life, she always returned to that rainy night when she pulled Thomas Crow Feather from Willow Creek. She had acted instinctively to save a drowning stranger, never imagining that single moment of courage would lead to finding her true family and life purpose. The homeless orphan who had once survived by scavenging and hiding had become Dr. Sarah Crow Feather, respected social worker, cultural preservationist, and beloved community leader. Her story inspired countless others facing seemingly impossible circumstances, proving that courage and compassion could transform not just individual lives, but entire communities. Sarah's legacy extended far beyond her personal achievements to include the programs she developed, the young people she mentored, and the bridges she built between native and non-native communities. The tribe's decision to adopt her had been vindicated many times over through her contributions to their welfare and the positive attention her story brought to Indigenous issues. The creek where everything began still flows past Cedar Falls, carrying water from the mountains to the prairie as it has for thousands of years. Local children now learn about the night when a brave teenager rescued a tribal elder, changing both their lives forever. The story reminds them that heroes can emerge from the most unlikely circumstances, and that single acts of courage can create ripples that transform the world.